look, first of all, Adam, thank you very much for taking the time to chat to us this morning. I know you're a very busy man with lots going on. So, look, thank you very much. First of all, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, pleasure to be here, Gareth. A little bit about myself. So I am living out in South Oxfordshire with my wife and soon-to-be daughter. We're expecting in a month or so, and our little border terrier Maud as well. I've spent many years, 15 years or so in London, living and working, predominantly in the software space, ERP software. Ardent Arsenal fan for my sins.
We'll maybe go into that a little bit later.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll come on to that. But a big family guy, really, really passionate about my career, helping others, driving business forward, and most importantly, having some fun along the way. I think that's really important for me. But we'll come into some of the stuff later on. But I think enjoying what you do is really at the core of what I believe in, and waking up on a Monday morning, keen and excited for the week ahead, and not leaving anything on the table. Giving it your all throughout.
Yeah, good man. No, I definitely agree with all of that. So, you tell us a little bit about, I guess, early life. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. So, I grew up just outside of West London in a place called Maidenhead in Berkshire. Went to school in Maidenhead, and actually to this day still in regular touch with a lot of guys that went to school with. Very fortunate to have made lifelong friends there. And then went on to secondary school in Sonning near Reading, a school called Reading Bluecoats. And I had a brilliant experience. School for me was actually a wonderful time. Made lifelong friends, as I said, and actually an all-round enriching experience. I thoroughly enjoyed not only the stuff in the classroom, but very much the sports, things like the cadets as well. So it was actually a pretty all-encompassing experience, and something that I look back really favourably from. And as I say, to this day, regularly catch up with friends from that group, almost weekly, which is great to think that was nearly 20 plus years ago.
Yeah. And did you do well at school? In the traditional form of grades?
Yeah, I think on the whole, I wouldn't certainly say I was top of the class in all subjects, but I think, what did I get? I think I got 2 Bs and a C at A levels, so pretty solid. I'm not going to
check that either, so you can say whatever you want, mate.
Yeah, I should have said
3 A's, let's go.
But I think it was summed up my school years is the kind of classic, good, but probably had the potential to do a little bit more. I mean, I remember looking back thinking, I think I needed 2 Bs and a C to get into university, and I got 2 Bs and a C. That at the time was kind of coasting through it. But I loved school. It was, I think for me, I was very clear in the subjects I liked. I really gravitated towards languages, French and Spanish in particular. So,
as I've seen firsthand.
You've seen firsthand in action, haven't you? Yeah. Yep. Sometimes with differing outcomes, but yeah, on the whole,
we usually get the beer at the end of it, though. I have to say.
Exactly. I mean, for me, language was something that I've used professionally as well, and it's something that I'm really proud to be able to use in a work capacity as well as socially. On holidays and conversing with Spaniards and French people too. However, there were times of challenge for me. Maths and science were real, banging my head against brick walls at times, and just didn't have the same fervour and passion for it, and really had to drag myself over the line to get the grades that I needed. So it was a mixed bag in that regard. But I think where the passion lies is kind of where, to a certain extent, I excelled because the desire was there to learn and to drive myself forward.
And I think you often see that, don't you? If something is not necessarily easy, but you enjoy, it becomes easy, doesn't it?
Well, I think your learning goes beyond the classroom, right? And I remember at the time, always the way I practiced my French and Spanish was to read an article in English and then read the same article in Spanish. So I had the context of an article, but it might be a match report of Barcelona or Atletico Madrid, and then read it again on the Spanish website and actually be able to take a lot more on. So starting to do that across both languages and, in different contexts really helped grow my language there. So that was something that I certainly wasn't doing that about physics or trigonometry or any of those subjects. That was very much the languages.
And so you mentioned maths and science being like a particular challenge. Was there any reason for that, do you think, other than just you just didn't enjoy it as much?
Yeah, certainly. I felt like the way I was. I guess. Do you know what? Actually, I'll change the way I was going to say that. I don't think I was ever excited by them, and I never thought how in the future I would leverage them. And maybe it was naivety, but the idea of language, the idea of IT as a subject that I did at GCSE as well, was I could actually see myself wanting to leverage it, wanting to use it in the future, and I
Yeah,
probably lent in as a result more.
yeah,
Um, there's some moments there when, in some of those deep physics classes or chemistry, I was like, I'm just never going to use this in the future. It doesn't excite me, so maybe I didn't engage as well. I think retrospectively, probably shouldn't have taken that approach for maths because that is quite useful. But
yeah,
thankfully, my arithmetic was all right, but still yet to find a chance to use Pythagoras theorem or something along those lines.
yeah. Thank God for the internet. And so, say if someone's watching or listening to this, and they either are, kind of at school or later, later maybe kind of heading towards like later further education, or they've got a child that's going through that, and probably there'll be almost everyone that will relate to this in some way, shape or form, especially maybe if they have multiple kids. Any advice you'd give to them if they've got a kid that's particularly fond of a subject or subjects and just not in others, but that there's probably value to applying themselves in the other ones? Is there anything that with you now being able to look back with 2020 hindsight, what would you advise?
I think there's the idea of breaking it down into more manageable chunks. Don't always go with the idea of that you're doing this to get an A or an A star grade. You're doing this so that actually you're more confident, you're more empowered, you've got a wider, broader set of skills. Maybe soften the approach as to not always such an output driven focused, driving towards a grade or the pressure associated with it. Maybe trying to find some examples in which they can leverage the skill to their own benefit in the short
Yeah,
term. So, thinking of maths as an example, potentially if you're going through your GCSEs, you might have a summer job or a part-time job. What does it look like if you were to use some of that maths to work out how you could spend that money well, how you could save it? If I did this for 5 years, what does it look like? Trying to make it personal to yourself, and I think
yeah,
how it benefits you or someone you care about, that is then becomes valuable to you,
yeah.
and then you start engaging with it more, as opposed to just being something hypothetical that you might use down the line.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think when I look back at school, I don't have, if I'm honest, particularly many fond memories. I failed pretty much everything. But I think, and bizarrely, so both my parents were teachers, which was probably a bit sad for them. It was so useless.
Ironically, my mum was too. She was an art teacher.
And it's really hard. And I think like if someone had actually sat down and allowed me to practically understand why I would need it and how I would need it and how I could then implement it in the here and now, because I'm very much, if it doesn't give me an advantage or I don't understand the here and now and the value to it, I'm very unlikely to invest my time and effort into it. And that's very much like when it was like, oh, you need to get this grade to get to here, and I was like, God, that's just so far away. Like that's what I thought. So I think it's interesting, and certainly as I went into kind of scraped by into like university, that's where I found it became much more. Well, certainly the course I did, there was a huge element of practical learning and theory rather than just theory.
Yeah.
Which then I totally excelled in. I was like, oh, I'm in my element now because I can actually get my hands dirty and I can go and learn and understand the business element of it and the whys behind just math. Like, what?
Yeah.
So,
what was it about? Yeah.
Exactly. And so, like, if you think about, so obviously left school with exactly what you needed, which is perfect, really. So nailed it. And then you went to uni. Like, walk us through a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think university was an interesting time for me. I'd, like many people, first time living independently, and probably overindulged in some of that like independence. I think I'd come from
Go on.
uh, I'd come from a relatively traditional upbringing, pretty structured, um, and I think when I flew the nest and had the ability to influence what my week looked like, I think early on in that university period, I probably didn't actually do myself justice in terms of the opportunity that was presented to me to learn. Certainly in the first year, maybe the second year of university, and again, I was having a great time. I was making friends left, right, and centre. I was getting involved in theatre. I was getting involved in American football, playing for the university, which was an incredible experience. But I wasn't focusing on my studies, and it was actually really at the end of my second year when coming to do exams and things like that, and probably a bit cocksure, having done some revision for exams, but the results came back terribly. And it was a real shock to me, thinking that it was a kick in the arse, really, to say, what am I doing here? I'm here now to get a good degree from a fantastic university at Birmingham, because this is now the stepping stone to my career. And if I don't apply myself now, then it's going to be too late in 3, 4, 6 months' time, and then I'm going to have to deal with the wrath of very poor, university grades. And we're talking that it was a check as to whether I was going to graduate or not.
Right. Okay.
And I tell you what, Gareth, I've never worked so hard. Like,
really?
In an educational point of view, I had to reassess everything. I was going to every lecture, every seminar, which was a polar swing from how the first couple of years looked like. And by hook or by crook, I got there and I got the 2-1 and I got it over the line and actually thoroughly enjoyed myself doing it. But it was one of those moments when I had to realise that just coasting along wasn't going to cut it, and you had to dig deep and had to invest it in time and energy in the course, but also myself, because otherwise the only person I was going to let down at the end of it would be myself.
Yeah, for sure. And is there any, I'm sure there's probably tons, but any particular piece of advice you would give to yourself, like your younger self, like whether it was like going into uni to begin with, or even when you were leaving school, anything that you wish you kind of knew, again, with the benefit of hindsight?
I think the one piece of advice that was given to me and actually probably came to fruition in the end that I'd say again is it's that idea of when you're in the final throes of final year, you're going through doing dissertations, you're revising for finals. You've really got to love what you're doing, and it doesn't matter if that degree is going to be what you go into at the end. Unless obviously you're a doctor or a solicitor or something along those lines, of course. But you have to love what you're doing, because there's going to be some long late nights, getting work done, and you have to have a passion for what you're studying. And fortunately for me, doing international relations, and politics, that was something I had a passion for and still do. So it's kind of like on a dark night, a cold dark night on a Tuesday in the library, you've got to still like it then. Like being away to Stoke on a cold Tuesday. You've got to love
That's
it.
when you're really tested.
Yeah, exactly.
Messi could never have done it. No way. No, nice. And so I'm sure you've probably worked since you've been able to. Like, can you talk us through some of your early jobs that you did and any funny stories?
Yeah, oh gosh. I mean, I think certainly the first jobs were the classic, waiting and being a barman at local pub and restaurant, and did it with a good friend of ours, Tom, and just used to wind the chef up so much. Like, it was almost going to work.
Was he traditionally very angry, as they always are?
Surprisingly, he looked like a character coming out of Boiling Point or something along those lines. It's the stereotypical male chef that looked like he was about to explode at any moment. But over the course of time, I got to know this character and his triggers. And the funniest bit about work was going in to wind him up, to be honest, which sounds quite cruel in hindsight now. But I remember one story about a customer had sent a steak back because it wasn't cooked to their preference, and so obviously he was boiling up. And then for a laugh, before I went out the door and came back and said, that he'd cut the carrots the wrong way, like they wanted them at like a 45-degree angle, not like the way he'd cut them. And I put the plate back on the pass, and I've never seen a plate come back so fast. And then moments later, a knife come flying past, and the plate hit me that side, the knife was that side, and it was wobbling in the wall. So
Okay.
that was the last time I ever wound that chef up.
Yeah.
I think that taught me
Jesus.
about taking a joke, but maybe don't take it too far.
Taking it too far. Yeah.
So,
My experience is similar of chefs, I have to say. So thinking about not necessarily where you are now, but how did you get started? Obviously, you've had a super successful career already. How did you get started in technology and software?
yeah, it was kind of coming out of university. So, as I touched on, I'd focused so much on my efforts getting myself and my degree over the line that really I did it at the detriment of focusing on kind of graduate schemes for HSBCs of the world
Sure.
and finance institutions and all the large organisations that were so typical at the time was the next stepping stone in your career. So at that point, I was ended up working for a flooring and construction company as a project manager in my initial role, and it was a real. It gave me wonderful grounding in terms of work ethic and you know making sure that the job has to get done by a certain time, because if it's not done, you're letting a lot of people down. However, it quickly became apparent that this wasn't the career for me, and that maybe I aspired for more. And it was actually a friend of mine pointed me towards a Pareto Law assessment day. Pareto Law, if you're not familiar with them, they focus on putting graduates into sales and marketing roles. And really, at that point, I went along to an assessment centre, and to be honest, I just felt like, to a certain extent, it was my calling. I felt like all the tasks that they were doing, whether it be teamwork tasks or individual tasks, that it just came naturally to me, and I really enjoyed it. And then they started looking for roles for me, and at the time I got placed with an organisation called Technology Management in Wolverhampton, that was a Microsoft Dynamics partner. Had a brilliant two and a bit years there.
Did you live up in Wolverhampton?
In Wolverhampton, that's it.
Oh, wow.
So I was still living in Birmingham at the time, so I was commuting
okay.
from Birmingham to Wolverhampton, so it wasn't too bad. But made again lifelong connections there. There's some of the team there and the leaders there that I remain in touch with to this day. And that was really where I cut my teeth initially in sales. Initially as a BDR. Understanding what the outbounding looks like, and really just hitting the phones and taking that work ethic that I built from the previous role, but into a professional sales environment. And then after 6 months of kind of that sort of part of the role, picking up customers, working with customers, working on new business deals and closing deals, and I loved it. And that was really the infancy, which seems so long ago now, but still very fond memories about it.
And what do you enjoy most? So obviously moving into sales, completely different from, well, there's elements that actually crosses lots of probably things that you've done historically. But is there anything in particular that you enjoyed most about sales? And knowing, you mentioned there, it was your calling, or you felt it was. Why was that?
I think it's first of all, in the simplest terms, it's dealing with people on a human level. It's having conversations. It's learning. There's no conversation that's ever the same, so no day ever looked the same. You might have the same framework or structure, but every engagement was different. And the beauty of it too was sometimes you were able to go on a journey with a customer. From the infancy of building a relationship to begin with, and then actually, over the course of time, seeing the realization of what you've worked on together quite often. Was I found really rewarding, and still do to this day. And there's nothing more satisfying in a sales or account management role when a customer turns around and thanks you for the insight that you've shared with them, or taking them, or even challenging them quite often to remind them why they're doing these changes, digital transformation, because someone has to make a decision, and sometimes they just need a little bit of coaxing to get there, to have the confidence and the trust to make the decision that, in some cases can be quite an expensive investment that they're making. And, that comes with responsibility and accountability. So supporting a customer through that journey and then seeing the rewards of it is something that I take a lot of pride in and enjoy and take satisfaction from too.
And I mean, look, as you know, I love sales. I think definitely in terms of calling, it was definitely something that definitely grabbed me at a young age. And something that I've obviously now kind of built a business around, but it doesn't come without its challenges, right? And there's plenty of them every single fucking day. And so you need a thick skin, you need resilience, you need grit, whatever you want to term it. Those days that you're getting beat, and then that's a few years ago or even to this day, right? Because there's going to be tough days and tough times. Is there anything particular that you do that you find helps get you through those tough moments, or you've done in the past that's helped you get through those tough moments?
Yeah, it's a great question, because there are very few jobs or industries where the highs are so high and the lows that sometimes feel crushing.
Check the grey hairs, mate.
Well, yeah, I had a haircut to get rid of mine.
yeah. That hair dye as well. Looks fantastic, mate.
Regain. I think there's two things here. It's about, I call it, staying even keeled. Not getting overexcited when the good things happen.
When things are going well, yeah.
Don't try to have such extremes of peaks and troughs. Absolutely celebrate. Absolutely, recognize achievement of you or your team or organization. Absolutely, and it's important to do so, because if you don't, why bother? However, also try to take it as in your stride as much as possible when you might have invested a hell of a lot of time on with a customer or a prospect or a deal or an organization, and it doesn't come to fruition. And sometimes there's a resentment or frustration, or looking back and beating yourself on what could I have done, and that when you get that news. But again, just like not getting overexcited, don't get too downbeat. Try and have the peak and the trough, the wavelength a lot flatter as opposed to highs and lows. That would be my first piece, and that's something that I really try to emphasize to my team too. And then secondly is trying to take challenges or circumstances into chunks, breaking it down. If it's a particularly challenging week, with either internal, external things that need to happen, just see it, try to break it down. I've got 5 tough meetings. Once you've done one, I'm 20% through, 40% through, and just in your mind, just trying to break it down like that, so that you can understand quantitatively how far you're through something, and I find that really works for me. That's where my maths came back into help, Gareth. See, I did 20%.
Straight off the cuff, mate. You didn't even have the calculator in show. And in terms of, so obviously, like you're now leading a team and the account management function at the organisation. We'll go into that in a little bit more depth shortly. Is there anything in particular, or any challenges that have come up recently that you feel tactically you've kind of helped navigate in either yourself or your team members through? Again, you may not be able to or want to share the detail, and again, it's not about that. Just more anything that somebody's maybe going through, like maybe they've had a tough Q1, right? So we're now April 2nd, I think we are, and maybe you've had a tough Q4 and gone into another tough Q1 because the world is strange right now. Things are taking time, deals are taking longer, things are moving out, people are needing more ROI, quick, all that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of work being done there, and a lot of good work. So it doesn't mean people have changed what they do. I think I argue that people are doing actually even better work now because you've got to. But is there anything that any advice you've given to your team members over the last couple of quarters that you felt as if they needed it, to really pull them out of maybe a bit of a tough time?
Yeah, I think it's also just visualizing, isn't it? What is success? And it doesn't always have to be the big shiny, 100, 110% or 130% of quota attainment. It's what does it look like? What have you achieved in the quarter that perhaps isn't the quantitative sales target, but how have you developed as an individual? What is that individual sharpened over the course of that 3 or 4 months as a sales professional or as a business professional that to point them at actually how much better they were now than they were a few months ago, and to reinforce that, I guess. And that success doesn't always come overnight, and I think we often work in an environment now where it's very easy to get gratification quite easily in many walks of life. And sometimes in a sales environment, you have to invest time and energy, and it doesn't happen overnight. And the merits of patience, and almost working with them to set their own expectations in that regard.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I think one thing that we've tried to do, and I think it's kind of going in similar style to yourself. It's like that regular check-in point, isn't it? It's knowing, like, so especially if you're a little bit more or a little bit less experienced or a bit more junior in your career, and again, no right or wrong to that, it just is what it is. Sometimes it's more difficult to pause and reflect, isn't it? Because you've also just had less time to reflect on, right? So, you know, you maybe only got a year or two behind you versus 15 years or 20 years or whatever it might be. And I think, but the benefit, and I think, you know, as a strong leader like yourself, it's having that regular check-in point to say, well, look, yes, you maybe didn't knock it out the park at 120%, which is good, you know, is great, but actually probably what you would rather have is consistency, but that development trend going up as well, isn't it? So you think, okay, well, you hit 90%, but you've done that consistently over time. You're not lumpy and going up, skyrocketing, and then.
And I think the big thing for me is to make sure that you kind of separate the idea of kind of the day-to-day catch-ups and meetings with teams, but actually then to really carve out time to focus on career development, professional development, learning, and invest it and listen. You know, it's an environment where there's no laptops. You know, there's no Teams or Slacks going. It's, you know, a conversation with an individual and listening and taking on board and being present in that moment and investing in that individual and making them feel heard. Because when you listen, you can pick up so much from someone as to how you can help them, and taking the time to do that and actually then go away and invest time in following up and doing the things that you spoke about. You know, it's so easy to go and have a great review with a team member and talk about all the great things that you're going to do and you know, courses they're going to attend and you know, networking things or whatever the case might be. But going away and doing it, well, when you're back to business as usual, making sure that you deliver on that to your team is really important.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And for those listening, could you tell us a little bit more about the company you work for now, the role you're in, maybe as well a little bit about your previous roles as well, just to kind of maybe provide some context? That'd be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the software space for about 16 years now. Particularly the ERP.
Not aged a day, mate. Not aged a day.
Not a day. Don't I look handsome? Enterprise resource planning. You know, I started my career in the Microsoft world, and then I had the privilege to work for NetSuite for just shy of 10 years until December 23. I worked in a number of different roles there, but probably 7 of the 10 years were in a sales leadership role, which was incredibly fulfilling. Part of my career and one that I'm very proud of the journey and growth I had there. And, you know, I love the NetSuite ecosystem so much that I joined what is EMEA's largest NetSuite channel partner as a sales director for account management and partnerships. So there's some continuity and certainly of the account management side of the role, which is really where I've built my career and my passion lies. But also working on the partnership side of the business. So when, you know, wherever customers need solutions beyond, you know, that have a bit more complexity, making sure that we've got a portfolio of solutions to support that. So that's been great to kind of build a wider network and in the ecosystem that I've enjoyed. But working with customers is what I love.
Yeah, brilliant. And so obviously, I mean, going from Microsoft to NetSuite, I mean, two of the largest and most successful companies in the tech space over the last 10, 20, 30 years, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, again, very large organisations. How did you find it kind of navigating through these? Because I mean, I wouldn't even be able to hazard a guess at how many employees, you know, are in each organisation. But you've obviously done really well consistently over time. So any advice for anybody that's kind of maybe in those organisations?
Yeah, I think, it's funny because when I joined NetSuite, I think the organisation was about 13,000, and then by the time the organisation was acquired by Oracle back in 2017, it overnight grew to 140,000, you know, as Oracle as an organisation, which was wild to think of, right? But I think in terms of advice, is it starts small and start local. You know, make sure you engage with people that you're going to be working with, either you know, leveraging their skills or expertise, or people that you're assisting. And then, try to work out, whether you've got a peer in a role, who they're talking, who are they working with, who are they engaging with for them to be successful. But then most of this is being inquisitive.
Yeah.
If there's people out there that, you see people gravitating towards, go and have a conversation. There is we live in a world where there's technology for everything, but nothing ever will be walking up to someone, introducing yourself, shaking their hand, and learning a little bit about them and what they do and what makes them tick, and sharing a bit about yourself too. There is nothing more powerful than building a relationship with someone within an organisation. And I was very fortunate that working for an American software company, on occasion, meeting individuals that do similar jobs to me, but on the other side of the pond, is not only when you meet them, but stay in touch with them. Once a quarter, have 20 minutes on a Zoom to have a chat. How's things go? What challenges are you facing? How did you deal with it? Continuing it, you have to nurture these relationships, certainly in a large organisation, because on occasion they might come knocking, asking for a favour or assistance, or vice versa. If you fostered that relationship, people are always going to be more willing to do so.
And I think you're right. It is, it's about making that effort, isn't it? And it's not, the easy thing is to not do it and just to crack on, do your day-to-day, or just think about yourself. But you've got to look at the long game. And it's, working for companies that American companies as well, that's something that I always had to kind of, step out your comfort zone, or whatever you want to call it, to be like, sometimes you're like, I'm really not sure I can be bothered doing this or whatever. It's like the easy thing is to stand with your mates.
You can't, how many work events have you been when you're like, you've got your peers that you work closely with, your team. It's very natural and easy to kind of, gravitate to sharing time with them. But actually going out there and introducing yourself, as we said a moment ago, or having conversations and trying to make things memorable as well. Try and learn one thing, unique about that individual, so that you can have that point of relationship with them. Are they a sports person? Are they a pet lover? It could be anything. It doesn't want to matter, but try and find something to relate that person on an individual level, as opposed to just keeping it professional. So that you don't always feel like you're coming with an agenda in mind. Totally. You actually want to get to know the person, and when you do get to know the person, and there's individuals that that worked on the other side of the pond at Oracle that were at my wedding. Because we'd gone, and not always will be the case that everything becomes a friendship, but there's a lot of good to come out of these situations too.
And I think you're right, and it's that whole authentic thing, isn't it? It's you're not trying to give to get. It's like, well, let's just build a human relationship.
100%.
And if it works out well and we get on really well, then happy days. It's great for everyone, because you've got whether it's a friend, a colleague, or whatever you want to call them. And if it doesn't go that way, it's just like, well, you don't need to speak to them again. It's not the end of the world,
And I can assure you, working in organisations like the size of Oracle, when there's 140,000 of them, you're not going to get to know everyone. So don't put the pressure to know that. You don't need to. But I think the idea of if information is shared, or deals are win wires get shared, information of people doing good work, taking a moment to reach out to them and maybe to be inquisitive. This idea of being inquisitive to learn and recognise people's achievements and work, people really appreciate that. It's simple things, right?
100%. And also, obviously, working for a company like that, I'm sure you've talked about some of your past colleagues there. You've probably worked with some seriously successful folk, whether it be sales, individual contributors, or I'm sure really successful and quite inspiring leaders. Is there any really impactful advice you've been given over maybe the last kind of 2 or 3 years that you feel as if that has totally changed my perspective or the way I think, and how it's helped you as a leader?
I think certainly it was something I was told earlier in my career, but it's probably more prevalent now in my new role in a smaller scale up private equity backed organisation is the idea of failing quickly. Don't be afraid to try initiatives, but also realise if it's not working, that there's no you don't always have to try and force an issue to finality. If it's not working, then don't be afraid to say, do you know what, that hasn't played out as I anticipated, or we're investing too much time in this initiative and I don't feel that we're going to get the returns or the yields that we want from it. Just just cut it off and get creative and do something else. You know, there is no shame in trying something and it not coming off, because it's you're damn better for doing it and learning on the back of, you know, whatever did or didn't work, so you know how to approach your circumstance next. If you don't try at all, then you're none the wiser, right? And you certainly got no chance of success. So the idea of, I guess, failing quickly, recognizing why, learn, and then try something again quickly. You know, don't let it knock confidence or your zest for trying new things. So, you know, take it, kind of water for ducks back, be a bit industrialized, and on to the next one.
And see, when you're in a large company, I mean, both of the companies you work for are I guess traditionally relatively large, but NetSuite in particular, in my experience, that entrepreneurial spirit of trying things isn't always, how do I delicately put this?
I think I know where you're going with it.
It's not always wanted, right? Because there's certain ways of doing things, there's certain structures in place. Challenging the status quo is not always what a large organisation is looking for. It's more, let's keep the ship steady and let's keep going. You know, we're not in that trying new things. How did you navigate that? Or did you find that difficult when you were working in a larger environment?
I think it's a bit bifold, because the first part is obviously an organisation like that is successful because it has tried and tested approaches and structures and frameworks, which actually bring a lot of reassurance and to your working methods, which is good. But sometimes, you know, I would be lying if there was times when, you know, whether it be myself or colleagues or members of my team had great ideas, but there was a kind of a corporate approach that had to be adhered to. That sometimes, you know, it didn't allow for maybe some of that creativity or thought or approach or agility to flourish, because of kind of corporate mandates. Now, NetSuite, Oracle aren't going to be the only company like that. That, you know, that any organisation like that is the case. However, it's at the time was, how can, you know, within the realm of my remit or my role or the team I was part of, is how can we have creativity and what can we have influence on, and controlling that and trying to I guess drive that influence into what is controllable, as opposed to stuff that maybe goes elsewhere to then go into a bit of a pot and never into abeyance and never hear back. And that's certainly something that in my current role is, you know, probably one of the biggest changes is that there is no defined success approach. You know, there's things that, you know, people do that work, but having the creativity and the flexibility to define how we engage with customers, how we engage with prospects, internal processes, and not always have a process for process sake, is an exciting thing. There's, on occasion, there's times when you're like, what is the process for that? And there isn't one, and you've got to go and do it. You know, on a rare occasion, you're sometimes like, you know, you do kind of think, oh, it was nice when there was a clear, defined process for this, but actually, it's exciting, you know, and not just for me as a leader, but it's empowering to my team too, because it's not just what myself or any of the other leaders in the organisation want. You know, we've got some very intelligent people in the business. Is, well, asking them, how do we want it shaped? You know, what does it look? What does ease look like for you? And making sure I get what I need, and you know, it's as path of least resistance for them too. So that's exciting as well. You know, and that's helped me grow in my career as a sales leader.
And you know, if you're thinking about somebody that's maybe becoming into the technology or software space into probably a sales or marketing capacity, they'll be looking at yourself thinking, you know, wow, like, okay, this started at Microsoft, into NetSuite, which became Oracle, and now a sales director at the largest partner and reseller in EMEA. I mean, like, phenomenal trajectory, right? Clearly super successful. Is there anything that you think really helped shape your journey, in terms of, like, whether it be advice or just anything like tactical? If you were at that point, you're on the building sites in that project management role, and you're like, look, this is great grounding, but I know this isn't for me forever. I just feel it. but probably at times you didn't know what your way out was. I would have thought. Like I've been in those shoes, and it's like, it's not 100% right. It's not your forever, but you don't see the path yet.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, I mean the simple answer is you've got to step outside your comfort zone. You've got to say yes to things that perhaps you might have said no to in the past. It would have been very easy for me with less than 24 hours notice not to go to that Pareto law assessment session that someone told me about in passing socially the day before. And they're like, oh, you should come along. Do you want me to ping me your CV and I'll send it over? That was a moment in time that could have passed by that I could have said, oh no, I won't get out of work on time. But, in my kind, I just called in sick the next day. Now, I don't endorse people taking that approach. But,
you suddenly get a few calls tomorrow morning.
I'm going to have my old gaffer on the line now. But, sometimes you've got to take a risk. You've got to be selfish. You've got to look at yourself. And if any of my team are looking now and they take tomorrow off, I know what they're up to. But,
they're at it.
From my point of view, you have to say yes. You have to sometimes you go into circumstances where traditionally you'd want to be more prepared going into them. But if you don't go into that environment in the first place, then you're not going to get the outcome you want, or you're not going to alter the outcome at all. So sometimes just take the risks, say yes to things, be inquisitive. Inquisitive is a word I use a lot. And get yourself out, take yourself out your comfort zone, go to, it might be networking events, but also gravitate to people that you kind of you see as successful. What is it that they did to get there? What are the steps that they went through? How did they prepare for things? And, ask questions, because you'll learn a lot quicker by asking people how they went through an interview process, or, what's life like on the other side of, at that organisation that you're trying to get to. Reach out to people in similar roles to find out about it. If you don't do that, you're not giving yourself the best shot at success.
Yeah, okay. And what are the most significant changes you've seen in your industry, whether that be in the software tech space or more into the kind of role around sales, marketing, account management?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sure you will hear it a lot over the course of your podcast series, but it's the AI approach. But what does AI mean? Is it AI for good? How is it going to help my organisation? But as opposed to just feeling you've got to do it, start small, start with baby steps, and identifying parts of your organisation, whether it be finance automation that are really mundane, trivial tasks, but just take a lot of time. How can we do that as a use case and start small, and actually now allow a finance team to focus on much more strategic things in their job that they probably enjoy a hell of a lot more? You're going to have a happier workforce, a more engaged workforce as a result. I would say, so going down the AI journey, but also be mindful about what that means from data security, data privacy, because, it's not just the task you're solving here that needs to be considered. There is a lot of governance that needs to be taken into account too. So it's very easy to download lots of different widgets and gadgets that help AI, but, you could be seriously exposing data of your customers, yourselves, your business, so just to be mindful of that. And then I think the one that we see that's really prevalent with companies that are private equity backed is ESG. Investors and customers are putting greater emphasis on their partners being carbon neutral, carbon reduction. Whether it sort of like be certified. The idea being is that businesses want to partner with like-minded businesses, and making sure that you've got a real clear definition of what that looks like for your organisation, because we are getting asked that all the time, and it's really important to have our stance laid out both internally for our staff to understand how we're trying to be better as an organisation, but also externally as well to be aligned with customers and prospects too.
Nice. And obviously the landscape of, I guess, the working landscape has changed since 2020 with obviously COVID. People working from home, some companies gone fully remote, some people have got these digital nomads and they're loving life in Lisbon or wherever it might be. And what's your kind of stance on all of that? Like, what do you feel is what's been the right setup for you and your teams? What do you feel has been successful? And is there anything particular that you're doing to to help your teams, I guess, continue to be successful in this new world?
I think this all boils down to trust. And certainly in my career, I'm in no way, shape, or form ever been a micromanaging type manager where I need you in X days or X time. But I think it's creating an environment, fostering an environment where people want to collaborate in person. We're fortunate that we've got a great office in London, we've got one in Nottingham and in rural Leicestershire. And, we regularly come together and my team are actively talking amongst themselves, what days are we going to meet? But the idea being is having some structure there so that when people do come into an office environment, they get value from it, they collaborate, they learn from each other, and everyone gets more from it. As opposed to just the mandatory days you need to be in, because that doesn't benefit anyone. I think, being, in a sales role, I think you're always going to have more enjoyment and drive when you're surrounded by similar sort of folks, with a bit more of a common goal, trying to share the energy amongst the team. However, people also need to get things done. And sometimes that focused work is better served at home. But I have less emphasis on where people are. It's making sure the job's getting done and empowering and enabling the team to be where they need to be, and know that we engage regularly, so that as long as we're both getting the information that we need to be successful and the task is getting done, then it's giving the employee autonomy to go about their job and feel empowered to do so.
Yeah, nice. And look, obviously, I am aware how committed you are to your work and your professional life. I know that you've committed a lot of your time, it's huge effort, and it's clear to see in the success as well that's resulted in. Thinking more personally now, have you got any kind of hobbies or interests outside of the Gooners that you find also that even that particularly helps you, maybe in a kind of working capacity as well? Is there anything particular you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think my big passion outside of the working environment is, as I say, Arsenal and going to follow the team around the country in Europe. But I think for me, it doesn't matter what it is for you, but you have to have that step away. One of the great pleasures I have is taking the dog with my wife and just going out and getting away from it, taking time away from a mobile, from a laptop, and just switching off entirely. Just find your thing. It doesn't matter what it is, and it could be however trivial. It doesn't matter, but just having that vocation, something you're passionate about, because when you are talking to others people, it doesn't have to be the most memorable thing, but make it known that you have something, that life isn't all consuming. The people that just focus on work and that don't have that passion for something outside, typically, I don't find them as well rounded as individuals. You have to find your purpose to do things. And, I won't go as far to say my purpose is Arsenal, but it's something that my wife would have a go at me if I said that.
I think she might. I think she might.
However, you've got to have something to passion, something to keep you excited outside of it, and woodworking is another one that if any of my friends listen to this, they'll be laughing at me. All the different woodworking courses I've done outside of work, but.
Oh really? Talk me through it. I've surprisingly not heard any of this yet.
Yeah. Well, my Christmas present was a carpentry course. We recently bought a house that needs some renovation doing to it, and having had a couple of carpenters' quotes, I was like, "This is wild. I'm going to do it myself." It's one of these moments of stubbornness and boneheadedness. I said to Millie, I'm going to do some carpentry. And before I know it, she signed me up for an intensive 2-weekend course in which I shipped myself off to Croydon for the weekend.
Oh, fair enough.
And which was an experience.
What did you build?
I built a room with a partition wall, a cupboard, a workbench.
I thought you were going to say you built like a coffee table or something like that.
No, well, there's plenty of projects that are now in the list to be building, but
oh, wow.
Yeah, it's something that's when we do a job like we do, with the pressures and screen related on phones, it was a real pleasure to do something vocationally
Amazing.
that you could apply to life as well.
Are you in the traditional form? Like, are you handy? Are you
Handy Andy?
like, do you like if there's a shelf? Like, would you do that, or would you be like, nah, I need to phone it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think I've always would have said yes.
Okay.
But the shelf would be level. So before it might have been a bit wonky. So I think I'd always get stuck in, but now it's probably to a slightly better level.
Fair play. No, good on you. I'm useless when it comes to anything like that, but I also just wouldn't even apply myself to try. To be honest with you, I'm terrible. In terms of like, you and I have obviously spoken at length over the years about development, self-development, and the importance of it all. Anything particular you do or you recommend that whether it's somebody again starting earlier in their career or maybe even someone that's trying to get a job similar to yours, anything that you've done over the last number of years that's really helped you get to where you are?
100% is to make sure you have a mentor, a career mentor.
Okay. Good shout.
It's something that I have found incredibly beneficial. The gentleman in my case that is my mentor, Mark Woodhams, he was one of the early. Well, he was the sales VP who kind of originally said, why do you want to become a manager? And ultimately gave me my first role as a sales manager. And having his guidance through the course of my career has been absolutely invaluable. Just
Amazing.
kind of questioning what you deem to be where you want to go with a career or decision making. Having a slightly more objective opinion or line of questioning that's different to perhaps your spouse or your family member or a friend. Someone that kind of steps away and sees it a bit more objectively is really valuable.
Yeah.
I don't think it has to be in the most formal of things. We catch up once a month and we have an hour and I'm prepared. Allow yourself for it to be quite a fluid and creative approach. It doesn't have to be a really hard defined style, but try and get a couple of individuals, ideally of differing kind of backgrounds or industries as well, just to get some breadth of experience and insight, I would say. But that has been really valuable.
Nice. And is there any, I know you're a big reader, is there any books or podcasts that you listen to that have helped you, like, again, give you a bit, maybe different perspective on life or business that you'd recommend?
There is one in particular. So I touched on that I love American football, and there's a book by a Super Bowl winning head coach called Pete Carroll called Win Forever.
Okay.
And, it's about the idea of always competing. Always being better, whether it's trying to improve yourself, compete against the competition, but also just trying to always level up to control what you can control. Don't beat yourself up if there's things that are outside of your grasp or ability to influence, and just to try and ultimately play to your strengths or your team's strengths, as opposed to trying to develop their weaknesses. Just focus on what people are good at and get them doing more of it and feeling good about that, as opposed to feeling like you've got to mend someone or improve something that's poor, because the chances are they won't enjoy it or don't feel confident doing it. They might go from like a 6 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10, but why not better take them from a 9 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10 on something else that they're much more passionate about. So there's some ideas that I think that I've always tried to adhere to in my career. Great book.
Brilliant. Any podcasts you listen to?
Podcast less so, to be honest. I would say the Challenger Sale podcast is a great one. There is a gentleman on LinkedIn that I really enjoy his content called Scott Findon. He's an AE at Monday.com, and he's a big advocate of Medic or MedPick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he does some great content there in nice bite-sized chunks, 2 or 3 minutes. Nice. But who knows, when I'm out walking the baby in a couple of months' time, maybe the podcast vibe is a way I will go. But obviously, I try to keep it short and snappy content for things like that.
Nice. Well, look, Adam, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it all. And all the very best with the little one and the good lady.
Yes.
I'm sure you're going to be a incredible dad
funny, isn't it?
when it comes.
you build a career over the years, and you know, work is such a big part, and it will remain a huge part of my life and, you know, career. But it'll be nice to be able to take a couple of weeks and take stock as to why we do it, and you know,
Yeah.
having building a family with Millie and then the little one coming along, it's going to be great, and I'm sure a really rewarding journey,
Yeah.
tiring one, but a rewarding one.
Oh, it will be for sure.